Hey guys, welcome to our first episode of Deuce Musica, a show that, for right now, we're going to say is about philosophy, politics, music discussion, and current events that me and my associate find interesting. My name's Gosh, and my friend Blendrix. I'll let Blendrix introduce himself. I'll give an introduction to myself, and then we'll proceed from there.
Hey guys, I'm Blendrix, as Gosh just said. I guess I'll introduce myself and tell you a little bit about me, my background. My name is Jimmy. The name Blendrix comes from the kind of natural progression of I'm a guitarist. I like to use guitar on all my tracks, and I kind of look up to Jimi Hendrix as a sort of a role model in terms of pushing the boundaries of current music trends and things like that. And of course, being a guitarist as well. So Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy, Blendrix, Blendrix. So that's where that name comes from. I'm live in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I have lived here for about 12 years. It's a place I consider my home, even though I've moved all over the country before that. But I've been a U.S. citizen and lived in the U.S. my whole life. That's one of the things that sort of separates the Gosh and myself. He's lived all over the world, so one of the many things that allows us to have counterpoints. Side note, Gosh, I'm not seeing my own video feed on here. Are you seeing my video?
Okay, I'm seeing you. Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right. Sorry, it disappeared for a sec there. All right. So I got into producing about 5 years ago. Ableton Live is my DAW of choice, and I also use Logic Pro for my mixing and mastering. I teach individual music production lessons, individual and classroom stuff through Blendrix Audio Academy. Let's see, I'm trying to think of other. I don't know. We'll get to the point where we're plugging our links and stuff like that at the end of the show. But okay. Some of the stuff for the background of my position on some of the topics, I've got a degree in business administration and a minor in English, and I was raised in a Christian family. I am currently an atheist, and came to that conclusion roughly 8 or 9 years ago. So that's kind of my background on the philosophy education kind of front. I'm a big fan and advocate of free open source software. Sort of a free thinker in a lot of ways, where whenever there's an established way to do something, regardless of whether it's the best way or not, I'm always looking for alternative ways to do something. And due to that curiosity, I've found a lot of ways of doing things that are sort of unorthodox in a lot of ways, but they've led me to a lot of realizations about myself and a lot of increased efficiency in a lot of things I do. Gosh, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jimmy. Hey guys. Obviously, let me start with I guess a bit of a musical background, since that's how Jimmy and I met. We'll go into a bit more detail as far as that goes. Obviously, stage name is Gosh. It's a portion of my last name, which is Abu Gosh, which essentially means father or lord of chaos, which I thought was really cool, but I didn't want to use chaos because that was rather cheesy at the time. So, and I also, at the time, I didn't want to associate my family or my name with what I was doing, because culturally, since I'm from the Middle East, nightclubs are not seen in quite a positive light. So I just took a segment of my last name and went with that. But musical background, I have dabbled in production. I haven't got as far as Jimmy. Most of my work in music has been more so performance and collaboration and essentially mixing. DJing and performing is what I would call my forte production. I'm still very much a beginner, but I do have a extensive background. I mean, I've been DJing now for probably over 12 years, so I have quite an intimate knowledge of music. Most of what I play is trance. I've had 3 residencies my lifetime. The longest one was at the church nightclub in Denver, which lasted about 6 years before I decided to step down and move back to the Middle East. I was born and raised in Kuwait, and me and my family left here right after the Gulf War in 1991, where we moved to Colorado, and I actually spent about 20 years over in Denver before moving back to Kuwait 4 years ago to try and, get a feel for the country here. I am Muslim by upbringing, but as I was talking with Jimmy earlier, we couldn't quite decide on the term. Either it was progressive Muslim or diet Muslim, or I have a very open, philosophy regarding the religion. And I mean, at my core, I do consider myself Muslim, but there's a lot of things that I consider not quite essential to the core of the religion that other fundamentalists might see as important. I don't. But again, this is part of why I enjoy debating with Jimmy, is just we do have these interestingly diverse backgrounds, yet we can find like a common core that we could respectfully discuss the topics with. As far as my views on certain things, I would like to consider myself progressive in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of remnants of just culturally how I was raised that do color the way I see things. Even inside, I know they're not 100% correct, but I cannot help going with those ideas or philosophies. Some might call me chauvinist, some might call me, well, a lot of things, assholes. But but it's I try to be as open-minded as possible. I mean, to all points of religion, to all points of philosophy, to all points of politics, things of that nature. And some things I'll agree with, some things obviously as with anybody. But the core of what we're doing here is to discuss differing points of views, and we're going to eventually bring in other people's points of views as well, and provide a forum that we can discuss and exchange ideas, as opposed to how usually the internet conducts itself, where they resort to name calling or something about people's mothers or whatever it is. We just want a forum for intelligent discussion that, you know, sometimes you might tune into and maybe get a different point of view, be convinced otherwise because what was being said appealed to logic or appealed to intelligence. Hey.
Yeah, that pretty much sums up my feelings on the topic as well. I think, one thing worth mentioning, Gosh, you mentioned that you're pretty set in your ways about certain things in your opinions, but I wanted to mention that as I've known you, during the time that I've known you, you've actually come around to a lot of ideas that you were definitely, set in your ways about before, but have gradually over time kind of allowed logic and reason to overcome whatever it was that you had been holding on to before, and I'm the same way. I'm sure you probably noticed some of the same changes or similar changes in me as well. So I'm part of what we're trying to do here is pass on some of that ability to evolve or willingness to see open, other people's points of view, and trying to stretch our awareness of the world. You push our boundaries, get our comfort zones to enlarge by trying to absorb other people's points of view on stuff. And so what we're trying to do with this show is to tackle the tough issues, tackle what's going on in pop culture, in current events, geopolitical stuff, ecological things, economy. It's going to range between all the different things that people typically will tell you not to discuss on a first date would be, I think, a good way of defining what our topic is going to be. But in general, the idea here is to get people thinking outside of the box, get people thinking about things in a way that they wouldn't normally think about them. And also to call attention to things that we think are not getting enough attention in terms of the general, the way that things are presented in the mass news media and things like that. So, of course, we're going to spend a little bit of time also talking about things related to music production, performance, music culture, rave culture, underground versus mainstream, some of that kind of stuff as well. But, a lot of that's going to dovetail into the whole pop culture thing. So I feel like I'm rambling at this point, but I just want to make it totally clear what our purpose is here. But gosh, one thing I think we skipped over a little bit is I think we ought to discuss a little bit of what caused us initially to cross paths. Because at first glance, I think that most people would say, "Oh, there's no way these guys would end up hanging out with each other. They got nothing in common, aside from the fact that they're both DJs." So I don't know. You want to talk a little bit about the thing that you decided to do when you were first getting ready to move back to Kuwait and the legacy you wanted to leave and how that led to me meeting you?
Well, I can. It's I mean, usually one of the words that I know that most people won't think of when I guess they mention me is romantic, and for the most part, it's true. But I did. How can I say? Despite my people might say aggressive demeanor at times, I actually love the music community. I guess what it could stand without getting too pretentious to the level of, and this is going to upset some people, say like Burning Man. I don't think it's a religious experience. I don't think it's a life-changing experience. I acknowledge the fact that people like you or I, at the end of the day, as far as our work in music, are entertainers. But I do think that that is an important thing that people need, and I think it is an important job. But it's not like doctors or engineers or astronauts. At the end of the day, we're entertainers. But that being said, I had a philosophy of how I thought entertainers should conduct themselves, how I guess kind of a integrity to their work. And unfortunately, this particular industry, the entertainment industry, is not a very moral industry, unfortunately. Usually it'll attract the shadiest kind, and I mean, honestly, to some extent, even the customers that come to it are usually not. It's not like. Let me try to think of an example here. It's not like working for a nonprofit for providing water to kids in Africa or such. But at the end of the day, I do think there is a core of importance and beauty in it. And I tried very hard to try and push that idea in the nightlife community, as far as kinds of music, as far as how I conducted myself, as far as trying to be a positive influence, as far as I didn't not saying that I did not drink or do drugs, if we're just being honest here, but I did not advocate it. That was not the lifestyle that I was advocating. So when when it came time, or when it came closer to time for me to leave Colorado and come back to Kuwait, Not too long before that, I ran into Jimmy, and being upfront and honest, there were not a whole lot of people that I liked in the community. I liked my fans. I liked the people that I worked for as far as people that hired me, but the fans and people that came and supported. And but the community as large, as far as like the performers, as far as the promoters, as far as the venues, it was usually not a place where I met a lot of positive people. And Jimmy was one that kind of caught me by surprise. He was at the time, he was kind of just starting into it. He's surpassed me on a lot of levels now, which I I'm I'm happy to say that I'm proud of, because I usually don't like anybody being better than me in anything. But there are certain people out there that have clean cores, that have just a cleanliness to their character, that if I see them succeed, I am happy to see them succeed, because I know they'll contribute great things to whatever endeavor they put themselves on. So when I met Jimmy, not that there's a massive age difference between the both of us, but I felt that if the one thing I was worried about when I left Colorado was that essentially again, using pretentious terms here, like the legacy that I would leave behind would evaporate, because at the time that I was leaving, there was it was happening for a few years, but kind of rise of the 800 DJs per event, and everybody gets a very short set time, which I think is an answer on the ability of the DJ to be appreciated or to encourage, because the promoter was now dumping the responsibility of promotion for an event onto many performers or DJs that were not talented, that did not know what they were doing, but they were just counting on the number of, if one DJ brings two people and you book 1,000 DJs, then already you have 2,000 people that are coming to your event that's full of shit music, but people are coming. Jimmy, what attracted me in the non-homosexual way to him was the fact that he was very talented. He hadn't, I guess, sprouted at the time, but I could see that the guy was very talented, knew his thing with music, and very, very driven. And just when he approached me and was asking me questions regarding performances, I had the feeling that he was honestly asking me to learn. He was not asking me out of some weird way to boost ego or to. I didn't feel there was anything negative from it. I just honestly felt it was an honest person asking me honest question because he honestly wanted to learn. And that to me was very refreshing, because almost any other DJ at the time that was approaching me was either in a competitive way, which I don't mind competition, but it was not pleasant competition, or they were asking to try and catch me saying something that they could maybe in turn say that I said something negative. It was essentially how you imagine catfights with women is how DJs are. And that aspect of it, I disliked, and I kept to myself for the most part. There were a lot of DJs and such that were in like groups or rosters or what have you, and I maintained a very solo mentality because I did not want anybody to be able to affect how I did my work, or to say that I could not do certain things. I wanted to essentially have control over myself. And what I was worried when I was leaving was essentially everything that I had built would evaporate once the inevitable landslide of all the crap that I had mentioned just pile in. And I mean, my favorite and main residency that I had, unfortunately, that's what happened. The church nightclub. I was running the night with another associate of mine for a few years, and then I took over it myself. And I was an advocate of 3 DJs a night, which was to perhaps the listener and obviously to someone like Jimmy makes perfect sense. But you would be amazed at how difficult of a concept it was for management to accept, where they wanted, why don't you bring 20 DJs? Why don't you bring 30 DJs? And nightclubs are only open usually 5 hours, 9 to 2. So that is 5 hours. To me, a DJ to play a decent set, you're talking at least minimum hour and a half for you to kind of just get started. So I was an advocate of fewer DJs, higher quality DJs for longer periods of time. And they fought me tooth and nail to try and change that format. But even though they did, it was consistently the most popular night at the nightclub, because people could actually not sit, obviously, listen to a DJ performing and be able to, and this is a word that's thrown around, not in this manner a lot, but they can groove to a DJ. It's building a relationship with a performer. If you have a person that's just playing for 15 minutes, there's no time to establish what this person's personality is, what the idea of the set is, what the night is going to be about. You can't do that. And with that format of just throwing as many performers at the wall as possible, where everybody's playing 2 records. First off, those people that you're hiring don't know how to play. That's number one. Number two, when you have that kind of format, then every person that's playing is just going to want to throw their most peak hour track right off the get-go, because they're only getting a couple of tracks to play. So that ruins the continuity of the night. And also on top of that, you have genres. I'm not against a lot of genres, but I also am of thinking that certain genres go together in a single night, certain genres don't. You can play progressive, you can play trance, you can play house, you can play techno even the same night, and it'll work. But you play, say, trance and then dubstep, and then it doesn't work. The kinds of people that go to those shows are usually not in the mood for both of those shows, especially at nightclubs. Festivals are different. Nightclubs, you want to get into a mood that takes you through the night. So back to the point I was making, the format that I was trying to run was 3 DJs, opener, mid, closer. And it worked because I would hand pick those people. And I believe I had you a couple of times, Jimmy. Did I have you come down to the church?
I definitely met with you down there, but I don't think we ever played any shows together. I do know that we did play shows together, but not at the church. We had you up here at the Aggie Theater in Fort Collins during one of our inaugural House of Dub events, which I'll get to how meaningful that was to me in a moment. But and then there was another one where we played a show called Mission to Mars in Denver. We were booked for that show completely individually without any, there wasn't any planning that went into us getting into that at the same time. But my respect for you as an artist came from having listened to your mixed CDs because I got them at events that I was going to, and like seeing you on social media and hearing the way that your sets went, and just the amount of it was clear to me that you were putting in the effort that it took to make sure that your mixes sounded good, that your CDs looked professional. You even had good you had like models who had their picture taken and then put through all kinds of cool graphic art stuff to make them look all digitally enhanced and not like photoshopped for a Maxim cover, but like almost digital representation of what the model would have looked like if she was a computer program, on the cover of a CD that was put inside a CD case with a jacket, and that kind of stuff wasn't being done. I mean, it used to be done a lot, but you were probably one of the last DJs to really put in that kind of effort on CDs where you weren't selling them, you were just giving them out at events. And that really spoke to me as an up and coming artist, as this is someone who actually cares about his craft, not just the music, but in the presentation of how it comes across, because in order to get someone to listen to your music, you have to be presenting the music in a way that it makes someone want to even put that CD in their player and listen to it in the first place. Because if they just get the CD at the event and it's Sharpie markers scribbled on the CD, and that CD is shoved inside a plain white envelope that doesn't have any markings on it, that's the same CD that they've gotten essentially from 4 or 5 other DJs, and what sets a person apart is not just the quality of the set itself, but in the amount of effort that it takes them to make that presentation of the CD to, I think that is an easy way for any listener to kind of screen the huge influx of music offerings that are put on, in front of them on a daily basis. Like, I have emails coming in my inbox all the time saying, here, listen to this track, listen to this mix, blah, 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 blah. The ones that I'm more likely to listen to are the ones that have a more creative artist name, where maybe, or they've got like a consistent weekly show that they've been doing. If it says episode 56 of a weekly podcast, and I can see that they've been doing it consistently for that many weeks, that's over a year of consistent weekly DJ mixes, and that's more consistent than most professional DJs would get. And I would be more likely to give that a listen than, just some random guy saying, hey, check out my track. So what I looked up to in you, Gosh, was the level of effort that you were putting into the presentation of the material, not just in the material itself. And one of the things that really spoke to me when we started doing shows together, when you came up and had that guest set at House of Dub here in Fort Collins at the Aggie Theater, it was a moment where I can clearly remember how it was a transition from where I thought, okay, the DJ plays the music and that's it. And the only way the DJ is judged is by the how good the set was. Yes, that is a large portion of it, and probably should be the most of how a DJ comes across, or any sort of musical performer. But what you did was illustrate to me the concept of stage presence and the concept of crowd interaction outside of the music itself, because there's stage presence where DJs will, do the whole Jesus pose thing. And I'm guilty. I've done it, and I think everyone's done it, but
I think we all have, yeah.
But one thing that really stood out to me was you actually at one point queued up your mix. You got the 2 tracks playing together well, and you had the beats matched perfectly, and everything was EQ'd so that there were 2 tracks playing at once. But you were so confident in that mix, you were able to walk out from behind the decks, walk all the way up to the edge of the stage, reach down and start high-fiving people in the crowd. And I just saw kids' faces lighting up in the front rows there, because you were reaching out to them on a personal level. And that was what inspired me to go the direction I have with my music stuff, where I'm not even just DJing anymore. I'm using my guitar. It's got a MIDI controller, and I'm using wireless iPads because of the ability to get out from behind the decks and interact on a more personal and direct level with the fans, where they can actually see what's going on. They can watch the mechanics of what I'm doing to make the music happen the way that it's going. And I think that's a really underestimated and undervalued aspect of music performance. So that was where I think I already knew that I looked up to you a lot before that moment. When that happened, it was like, this is why I started hanging out with this guy, so I could learn stuff like this. So I think that pretty much defines our background and our sort of the beginning of our friendship. And I'm sure as this podcast continues and for future episodes, we'll get more into the nuances of how our friendship developed, in the months and years following after that. But I think we probably ought to.
I mean, we're essentially establishing the fact that we are friends through music, but with differing backgrounds, and I mean there's a mutual respect, which is how hopefully this broadcast will continue, because there's that core of mutual respect, and even with differing opinions, that's how we're able to conduct this broadcast. But you were saying we should. I
was like, we probably ought to get on to our actual topics that we're supposed to be covering. We have an abbreviated broadcast this time because we've allotted time for making our individual introductions and talking about our backstories and such. So today we have a shortened version of what we would normally be doing, where we will normally cover maybe 2 or 3 heavy, intricate, complex topics and try to tie them together as much as possible. Whereas with this episode, we're probably just going to end up talking about one topic and kind of how that dovetails in with what's going on in current events. So
I agree with you. Do you want to hit us off with what the topic today is?
Yeah, I guess so. Just in case people are watching this episode later on, the context for the topic we're talking about here is that last week, Robin Williams committed suicide, and it's affected a lot of us, especially artists, performers, and things like that, in a pretty serious way, because we think about our own mortality and the fact that comedians and performers in general tend to have more. They think about themselves more critically and have a lot more moments of self-doubt and things like that than the average person. I think that in general, artists tend to be a little more of an emotional roller coaster than the average person. And though we try to hide it as much as possible, and especially in the case of comedians where they actually take their emotional turmoil and turn it into the fodder for their comedic routines, really the issue has been eating at the heart of a lot of people in the entertainment industry, and it got me thinking, and it got Gosh thinking about this, the idea of what is there a way to commit suicide that is that it would be okay? Are there circumstances under which suicide / euthanasia is morally acceptable? Where does that line get drawn, and then how does that tie in with things like senior care, our current healthcare system in the U.S. and internationally? Gosh, do you want to lead with your thoughts on the topic?
Well, one of the particular points that I was wondering, again, this it's an interesting topic for me, because as far as religious goes, and with a lot of the religions out there, suicide is a no-no, regardless of circumstances, regardless of what the view is. It's a big no-no. It's obviously it's a sensitive topic for quite a few people, Jimmy included, and he'll get into the details here of why. I'm coming at this, I guess, from more of a philosophical and legal perspective, whereas, say, somebody who is not sick or not clinically depressed, somebody who might just be tired of living, as contrived as it sounds, just somebody who's accomplished everything, they've gotten everything they've needed to do done out of the way, they've had their kids are self-sufficient, just they're done with living. Or maybe perhaps they're suffering from a disease that will rob them of their ability to live some sort of quality life, and they would like to go in a dignified manner before. I mean, say something like Alzheimer's, which it's I have a soft spot's not the right word. One of my points of sensitivity are diseases that destroy uh, what the core of a person is, which is usually anything that attacks the mind. And Alzheimer's is one of those diseases that destroy essentially who that person is. It's not even being trapped in your own body, something like ALS, but it's something that destroys the actual core of that human being. So some people might not want to live through that, and though people say, well, cures might be down the line, who is they to end their own life that they want to live in a dignified manner, and that they are making the choice. They're not sick, they're not depressed, they're coherent, and they are just making a conscious decision before the disease takes them to where they cannot make that kind of decision anymore, that they would like to go in that manner.
My unique sort of take on or perspective on this is that both my maternal and paternal grandmothers are currently in very poor physical condition, and it's been a very rapidly escalating situation for both of them within the last few months. And so the topic has actually come up a couple times in within my family, my immediate family, between myself and my parents, my sister, and we're talking about what's being done with and for our grandmothers in terms of their care, trying to find a good balance between offering them as much freedom to continue living as they want, but also trying to reduce suffering as well. Where do we draw the line between, are we torturing someone by prolonging life where it obviously should not continue? For instance, in the case of my maternal grandmother, she's on a handful of different medications that are essentially keeping her alive. And by doing so, they're allowing her to experience very harsh reality of having to live through basically the mental deterioration. She is, I don't know if she's actually been diagnosed with real Alzheimer's or not, but she definitely is going through some mild dementia kind of stuff. And it's to a point where she's, thinking that someone's sitting right next to her when there's no one there, and believing that she's seeing things occurring in the parking lot outside when it's actually something that she saw happening on the news. So she's thinking that there are people being murdered in the parking lot outside the hospital that she's staying at, where really the source of that information was coming from a news broadcast that she saw on the TV. And so the question becomes, are we putting her through mental torture by basically forcing her body to continue to stay alive by giving her these medications that prolong her life? Whereas if she wasn't taking them, her body would basically be shutting down in one way or another, a heart attack or a stroke or something like that that would probably lead to her death. But is it her time now? And the question we are also asking ourselves is that our call? It's not. We're not making any unilateral calls on any of that kind of stuff. We're not deciding for her on any of these fronts, but it is a question that comes up. What is it that determines whether it's moral for us to say, okay, now it's time to end this regimen of medication that's prolonging this existence, and how can we be sure that we're making a call that's that's objectively moral, as opposed to just whatever seems right through our own lens of how we view the situation. So obviously, we're doing our best in these situations to make sure that we're keeping the wishes of the actual subject of this conversation at paramount. But it's a very tough issue, and that this is just having to do with becoming old and going through the process of sort of physical and mental decay. But there's also the questions of when someone has been injured to the point where they are put in a coma for a certain number of years. Where do we draw the line on whether we pull the plug or not? Is it moral to say, you know what, without this machine keeping them alive, they'd be dead? So, of course, people have woken up from comas 20 years later. So it's there's a lot of gray area, and I think this is one of the things what we end up having these really long, protracted discussions about, because there's so many different angles to approach the discussion, and so many different important points to be made, and important viewpoints to observe the situation through. So.
It's also
honestly, I'm gonna just finish one part about this. Personally, myself, if I ever became in a vegetative state, whether that was due to an injury or some sort of physical malfunction of my body or anything like that, I would not want to be kept alive. I've told my family that I do not want to be resuscitated in any circumstance where I'm in that sort of limbo situation. And I think that my family is all pretty well agreed on that concept, that when our time has come, it's come, and we shouldn't try to stick around longer than we should. But that's our own personal opinions about our own existence, and it really gets a lot fuzzier when we start discussing how we should administer this process on the lives of other people. Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Oh no, it's good. And this is, I mean, you brought up a couple thoughts here while you were talking. It's intrinsically a tough subject to talk about because it's such an emotionally charged subject, and you try to apply logic to it, and it's a very tough way to make any argument. There is no definitive way to say this person is now definitively beyond the point of being able to be resuscitated. You cannot just logically hit, say, like family members with that kind of point where it's like there's no hope. It's an intrinsic. It's a tough. You have to debate the topic from a point of view that is, how can I explain this? You're arguing logically to an emotional topic, and those two don't mesh together really well. And this brings to light another issue: is you have two end results one end result with multiple avenues to get there. Now, what I mean is, one of it is getting old, injury, disease, that kind of thing, and you want to end the suffering. And then you hit it from the other point of view, to where it's just people like with the late Robin Williams. The guy was ill, but and I don't pretend to know all the details, and I'm not the kind of person that wants to get into details of other people's personal lives, but just on the surface, from what I'm understanding, is he might have just needed help. And with how a lot of countries view depression and mental illnesses like that's that seems to be a point that needs to be addressed, because I think a lot of people just assume all depressed is not having enough inspirational memes in your life, or somebody telling you to, cheer up, champ, or that kind of thing. They're not seeing it as it's an actual physical, like, chemical imbalance, or some sort of issue with your physical mind that's causing these thoughts, that if they were addressed in a way that we would address physical illnesses or injuries, that we might come upon solutions. It's and I think that's big, and I see it. Not that I'm sure both you and I, and I'm sure any person on Earth, has gone through bouts of depression, but we have either the support system or the functioning mental capacity to be able to get over it. And just say with white blood cells, where it's a natural body response to an infection or such, where we are able to recover ourselves back from that edge, where we might push ourselves forward and do something like take our own lives. So,
but it's all stages. It's all varying degrees of how much depression one person is experiencing and for how long. And it's a sliding scale, just like everything else. There's I've been depressed, really, really severely depressed before, but only maybe for a week or maybe 2 weeks at a time. I don't know how long any of your depression bouts have lasted, but I know that when it's happened to me, I've been able to pull myself out of it, or something has occurred that allowed me to take a new perspective on it. And it wasn't just me deciding to feel better one day. It was because I spoke with someone who, helped me see things in a different way, and then that kickstarted a series of events that led to me feeling better in the long run. So, as an example, if I'm feeling so terrible, and this actually happened less than a year ago, where I basically couldn't get out of bed for about 3 or 4 days in a row, and of course, not getting out of bed for 3 or 4 days in a row led to severe sleep cycle and the chemical imbalances, just from the not getting out and not getting sunlight, not getting the blood moving and stuff like that. Of course, can't get out of bed, you can't eat, and so there was the malnutrition that spiraled in with all that kind of stuff too. So in this 4 days in of not being able to get out of bed because I just couldn't get up the motivation to actually move, I had a conversation with my mother, and that conversation spurred me to get out of bed and get something to eat. And I went back to bed after getting something to eat, but getting that something to eat allowed my body to generate the energy that I needed to get out of bed again later that same day and do one more thing, and sort of, but I needed that kickstart. This kind of dovetails into back what you were saying before, where it takes some sort of intervention, whether it's medical or whether it's social. Our society is not prepared to deal with it in either of those ways. Our society basically says that mental illness either doesn't exist or doesn't understand it in any meaningful way, and so we're put in this really bleak situation where we end up having to cope with these circumstances completely on our own, and we're not given very many lifelines at all. So, of course, when we get one and it hauls us out of that negative state of mind and brings us back onto the into the regular course of life, who knows how close we may have come to actually deciding that we wanted to end it all. I don't know how close I was, but it might have been it might have been one more day. Who knows? But the bottom line is that Robin Williams and other people who have committed suicide, whatever it was, that point they reached that point, and at that point, no one had reached out to them, and they weren't given the amount or type of care that they needed in order to bounce back from it. And I think we all just need to be more sensitive to the potential that someone close to us might be going through something like that, even if they don't exhibit outward signs of it.
Society is somewhat ill-prepared for mental illness because there is how can I say, there is a faction of people wanting to help but not helping in the right way because they have wrong assumptions of what the issues are. And I see it a lot, and it kind of inspired, and this is something I will probably talk more about as these shows go on, but I've started this campaign of, I call it Stay Angry. And some people misinterpret it as me just being an angry person, hating everything, which is true. But that's not the point of what it is that I guess of that campaign. Essentially, what it is it's honesty or sincerity in what it is you're trying to do. And the last thing a depressed person wants to hear, or somebody, so I should say not depressed, because that doesn't quite encompass the completeness of what mental illness is. If somebody is clinically, medically, physically depressed to where it's an actual disease, the last thing they want to hear is and again, I'm assuming we're all adults here, so we're going to proceed into adult language. The last thing they need to hear is some asshole sending them some sort of inspirational meme that doesn't help anything, because they are actually suffering from something, and it's not just a change the way you think about your issue and suddenly it'll be okay. They're actually suffering, and that is the main point of recognition that we need to make. Are you just depressed because you're having a bad day, or are you depressed because you're actually ill? And
right.
And insincerity, I think, will cause more issues with somebody that is mentally ill than somebody who's just depressed. Somebody who's just depressed, maybe an inspirational quote might help them, might make them pissed off. It doesn't have really horrendous consequences, but insincerity, I think, makes people with mental illness feel even more misunderstood and more alone, because they are getting the feeling that the person that is saying or telling them to feel better doesn't understand anything about what's going on with them.
But it's not just about sincerity, though, because someone could be saying something like that, and their intention, their real, sincere intention could easily be, I hope that by saying this thing to this person, it helps them cheer up. Because, a lot of times when someone's sending one of those things along, it's because a similar or maybe the identical phrase was actually said to them when they were feeling down about something, and it helped them get through it. Sometimes a motivational quote does actually, help someone get through a tough situation. So the sincerity aspect of it may have very little to do with whether it actually gets through or not. A person's sincerity, the message's sincerity could have very little to do with whether it has a positive effect on the recipient. And so in a case where, like what I was talking about, my situation, the message wasn't trite. It wasn't buck up, buddy. You'll turn over a new leaf. Tomorrow's a new day. None of that stuff. It wasn't like that, but the words did allow me to look at things through a fresh enough perspective where I was able to use that to bootstrap my brain out of depression mode. But not everybody's situation, not everyone's depression is bootstrappable. In other words, It could be that you could say something sincere or insincere. It doesn't matter what you say or how you say it or in what way you intend it to come across. No matter what, words will not help. And unless you're walking up to that person and giving them a direct injection of the exact chemical cocktail that their brain needs to get out of that downward spiral, it's not going to help. And
well, I think that's part of the issue. Is I think people assume that approach, where it's the bootstrappable, as you were saying, method of helping applies to all types of depression, and I think that is the primary issue.
Right, and it helps with some, and that's part of the problem. Is because it happens to help some people. People assume that it will help everyone, and it's not. They're two completely different kinds of depression, or maybe just different levels of severity. And at one level of severity, it's possible to have enough positive reinforcement and true, sincere support from loved ones and enough positive reinforcement to actually get you out of that situation. Whereas if you go beyond a certain point of no return, then it doesn't matter what anyone says, who says it, how many times they say it, how much money they offer you, or any of that. None of that matters. That's where it's clinical, must be treated with medication, probably ought to be under constant observation to make sure that they aren't a danger to themselves until they're actually in better shape. But where do we draw that line? Should I have been locked up because I was feeling bad?
And that's a very good point. Even if you are taking the we were discussing earlier the point of right to die, that being a personal choice, that's an ambiguous line. And then you bring it to this one too, where it's saying, how do we draw the line of, okay, when do we need to start medically monitoring this particular situation? Again, it's unfortunate because I think a lot of these issues, it's not people wanting to be assholes or such. It's just there's not enough research, and even the research that's there is not very spread. Not a whole lot of people are aware, and part of it, and this is probably a topic for a future episode, is I think a big part of what exacerbates these situations with these people that are depressed is social media. Either their comparisons with other people's lives, or just with how easy it is to make somebody feel worse about themselves behind the internet, where you can say things to people. And I've seen some of the comments people put on a lot of things, and to me included, where it's vicious, and it wouldn't be so vicious if it was a situation where you were personally in that space with that person, because people tend to not be as brave when being in physical presence. So, but I kind of lost track of what I was.
I like where you were going with that. You were saying that how when people make comments on something online, they're much more likely to be very, very caustic and more confrontational online. I don't know if this is actually a phrase, but I think I want to coin it right now if it's not a phrase, and that's to call it the road rage effect. Something that someone would scream out their window in their car, and the gestures that they would make to someone who cut them off in traffic is, some of the most violent, ignorant things that I've ever heard anybody say are the things that when one person says to another person who's driving a vehicle. But if you were to have that very same traffic mix-up on foot on a sidewalk, if someone were to step in front of you, cause you to stop short on foot, you wouldn't say, bleepity bleep you bleepity bleep, I'm going to bleeping kill you and your grandma. You wouldn't say any of those things. In fact, you would say, oh, excuse me. And I think that same rule applies to online interactions, and there's just so much more. It's not even the promise of anonymity anymore, because people are going by their real life identities online, but it's because of the fact that they're not threatened with physical retaliation. It's like, because of the fact that someone can't punch you through the computer screen, because of that, people are more likely to be more confrontational online, I think, than they are in person.
To add on to that point, I mean, with the road rage effect, as you were saying, that is kind of a different animal, because you have a situation that you run into that you're just instinctual animal lizard brain reaction is to get angry because something happened and you just reacted to it because you were afraid or freaked out or such. Whereas with the internet, with online culture, it seems a lot of people go out of their way to initiate these hostile interactions. And I've thankfully, just how I was raised, and I don't know what it is. A lot of what's helped me in life is just how I look. People just, especially in person, they don't initiate too many confrontations. I don't know if it's the facial hair, and I was also a lot larger when I was a little younger, so that might have had to do with it. But I've had, or due to certain things like my heritage or religion or such, I've had just some of the most ignoramus, caustic, just violent things being said to me, because first it's, well, actually, I think the only reason is because it's online. Whereas in person, and I've conducted experiments, and now we're kind of getting off topic, which is a good thing because we're about out of time here. But with these interactions, I've when I was walking in downtown once, I remember it's I was driving in Five Points, and I was going through a crosswalk, and there was nobody in there, and this I'll call him gentleman. He wasn't. Thought I was going to hit him. I didn't. And he started screaming and cussing out. And me being kind of the confrontational individual that I am, because he was threatening something, and I could hear him. I had the window open. I stopped the car, and I actually walked back to him. And I asked him, I'm like, I couldn't help but hear what you were saying. Like, is this really something you want to do? And the guy's English suddenly turned perfect. And he was, I'm sorry, and things like that. So it's a really weird.
Begging your pardons, dear sir.
Exactly, monocle and everything. So it's a
top hat.
Exactly. So it's a really weird thing, and it's something that I've physically had to like make sure about myself, that I don't want to do anything in my online life, so to speak, that I would not do in my real, actual, physically present life. I wouldn't say anything or do anything online that I would not physically do. Anything I would say to you online, I would say the exact same thing in person. And that if we can get something like that going, if we can get that mentality going, that would help, because I think a lot of those unfortunately I don't remember all their names, but those kids that were essentially bullied online into committing suicide is a perfect example of that. It just the thinking that somebody would be so callous and mean spirited that they would go out of their way to be like, to encourage people or to push them to killing themselves just because they're online. You don't usually see these things in real life. So that's, but this is more applicable to probably younger people, not somebody like Robin Williams, because I'm sure most of his life growing up, there wasn't, I mean, internet barely comprised.
I think his demons were all internal. I mean, I'm sure he's probably had people scream at him from the audience, "Kill yourself," all the time. I bet he gets that at least, or when he was doing stand up, I'm sure he got that all the time, several times per tour, maybe even several times per night. I've heard people say that to musicians, people say it to comedians, to talk show hosts. It's like a go-to thing that hecklers will yell from the floor. For whatever reason, that seems to be the thing that makes people, think, this is, I get to say this because I'm funny, haha. And I
that's one of my least favorite.
That probably has nothing to do with Robin Williams' suicide. I bet his suicide was not driven whatsoever by anything that any one person said. I think it was, based on the fact that that we know from the sort of his history, that he was in therapy for a long time. He's been seeing therapists. He's been going to rehab and things like that. He's been struggling with addiction and depression for decades. And at some point, I think at this time around, whatever it was that got him out of it before either wasn't enough this time around or didn't get there soon enough this time around. And anyway, I think we've come full circle on that part of the discussion. And do you think it would be okay for us to move on to our things we ...
things we let me just put one sentence, I guess, as a closer to that topic, and then we'll move on. Essentially, the point that we're trying to make here is and as with all of the other topics that we'll discuss, it's not a simple thing. There's multiple causes. There's a lot of issues that are along from a lot of different avenues, all that have a unfortunate conclusion. So this is something we need to get into as far as society in general. We need to get into more detail so that if it is something that we can help prevent, then we need to be aware of what the problem is and what we can do to help. But as far as the other side of it, where it's the right to die, and you of sound mind, that is a completely different topic that has, I guess, nothing to do with it has the same outcome. It is just a completely, I guess, a different Pandora's box. So are we good on this topic for this week, Jimmy?
Yeah, I think so. And we may end up coming back to it in future episodes, particularly if we end up having an episode where we bring in another guest host who might have some more additional viewpoints to offer on the topic. But for now, I think we've given it enough coverage to where we can welcome comments from the viewership and maybe discuss the comments in our next episode. We'll have to determine how we can work in comments and follow-ups to previous discussions in future episodes, but we'll get to all that at some point in the future. But
agreed.
So at this point, we'll be moving on to a segment that we are calling, for the time being, we're calling it "Things We ... which is just to say things that we love, hate, things that we are confused about, things that we wish we were doing right now, things that we are glad we're not doing right now, all that encompassed within. Gosh, why don't you start us off with the Black Phone?
Well, it's this particular piece of technology I like. I'm a private guy usually. Even with my online persona, I don't really talk about anything personal, and I don't like personal details of my life being shared. With this Black Phone, and you can get more information on ordering and pricing. It's on blackphone.ch. It is it's an Android device running a modified Android OS that essentially lets you control what applications and what I'm trying to find a simpler way to say this. It is essentially something that allows you to control the privacy of your phone. With current handsets and even mine, I've had to do extensive modifications to my phone to stop certain applications from communicating information that they should not be communicating to whatever outside source. And this phone, though slower than, say, like the new Galaxy 5s or the Note 3s or even the iPhone, it's still pretty snappy, but it allows you to completely control what the phone allows and stops from communicating to it and out of it, whether on Wi-Fi connections, whether it's applications, whether it's 3G. Also with text messaging applications, it will encrypt the text messages so that obviously anybody outside can't read. It's a great device, and I mean, I'm sad that something like this has to be made, but just being a realistic person, I acknowledge how the internet is and how the fact that almost our entire lives are based on our mobile devices are. So I'm glad to see something like this coming up because I'm not comfortable with, say, say something like Facebook has access to essentially everything on my phone, from like my contact list to like my underwear photos. It's just not something I'm comfortable with. Whether somebody checks it or not, I'm not comfortable with it, and I just want to be able to have a say so in what anybody can and cannot see on my phone. It's priced pretty decently as far as handsets go. I think it's going for about $640 without any service contracts, which is, I think, very normal pricing for any handset outside of a contract. So that's my personal things we love this week.
Got it. I would. I mean, this is sort of following on to what you were just talking about there. I'm interested in Black Phone and in any sort of handset that's geared towards personal privacy and such. I feel like almost any hardware handset ought to be capable of this level of privacy if the software that's loaded onto it is done right. For instance, the phone that I'm considering getting right now is the OnePlus One. It's made by a company called OnePlus, and the model is the One. And it is, I think it's about $300 unlocked, no contract for the base model, and I think $350 or $400 for the upgraded memory model. It has like 64 gigs of onboard flash memory, and it is the fastest phone that's out there. The phone that comes stock with they basically made a custom version of the CyanogenMod ROM specifically for this version of the phone, and so I'm looking at this going, okay, this is awesome. This phone is faster than everything else out there. It's got more RAM. It's got the best processor I've ever seen on any of these things. Great display, great battery life, and the fact that it's cheaper than anything else on the market without a contract. I'm thinking, okay, what would it take to make all the same things that the Black Phone is capable of on some other handset? For instance, the OnePlus One. The fact that it runs CyanogenMod from the factory means that one ought to be able to remove all of the bloat and such from apps that like things like Facebook and stuff like that. If you wanted to block Facebook from getting into the rest of your phone and checking out your contacts, there ought to be some sort of app, whatever it is that Black Phone's doing to prevent that access. You ought to be able to do on any ROM. So I'd be curious to hear comments from many of our audience that says one way or the other whether that's possible or not.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the question posed to the audience is also, is this something that you guys feel is necessary in your life? Are you feeling that, especially with a lot of mobile applications that are asking for excessively weird permissions, like video game, mobile games and such, asking for access to your phone gallery or your contact list or something like that. Is this something you would consider buying and you would think is necessary?
That's a good question, and this, I guess, kind of deals more with just the way that they, and I guess we're really talking about the Android operating system here, but it applies to the iOS devices as well, because basically when you install an application on an Android device, you get a list of different parts of your phone or different permissions that application is going to need. You're getting that list when you're trying to install it, and that list includes all the things that application may or may not end up needing to do at some point during the time while you own that application, whether it needs those permissions right now or whether it's going to need them in the future for some specific function of the app that you may or may not try to use. It tries to get all those permissions up front right when you're trying to install it. My thought on this is that they ought to make it so that when you install the application, it only asks for the permissions that you need to install the application. And then later on, as you try to use the features of the application, it asks you, hey, this application is trying to gain access to your photos. Well, that makes sense if you're trying to share a photo through that application. For instance, a game that's trying to access your gallery. Well, it makes sense if the game wants to use your gallery to create the avatar for your user in the game environment. That makes total sense. But it only makes sense when you're actually trying to set your avatar, not when you're trying to install the app. So I think that simply implementing a system where the permissions are given on an as-needed basis, you must grant all permissions as when you're trying to install the app, regardless. Or maybe it should be a switch that you flip. It's like, if you don't want to be bothered with all these questions later on and you don't care what kind of access it has to your phone, then you just give it all the permissions up front and don't pay attention to it. But if you're a more security-minded person and you want to be asked for permission for these things on an individual basis, then you could have it in a more sort of as needed basis. So that's something that Android could easily implement. But this is one of the reasons that I am sort of, I don't know, I'm in a love-hate relationship with Apple devices. I love them for their reliability and their interoperability with applications that you use on a computer that you can control remotely from your iPad, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the iOS ecosystem is toxic to privacy. When you download an app from the App Store on an iOS device, it doesn't ask you anything at all about what kind of permission you want to give it. Basically, when you sign up with iTunes, that big long thing that no one reads, that thing basically says any app that you download is free to use your device in whatever way that it has been programmed. And above all else, Apple has access to everything in your phone, including all of your personal information, blah, blah, blah. It's one of the most draconian sort of big brother environments for information exchange that I can imagine, outside of actually buying a CIA branded handset, which I don't think is that far off, really.
It's getting there. I'm sure even this podcast is probably going to be looked at some point by them as well.
Well, sort of related to what you were talking about with the Black Phone, I want to talk about one thing that I would have ended up addressing on my love list, but it actually is very much related to what we're talking about, so it wouldn't make sense to say it later. It's Google has developed a browser plugin called End-to-End. It's currently in a source code only existence where you have to be able to compile the source code and then install the extension manually in your browser. So this is for Uber nerds only currently. I have actually compiled the source code and installed it on my browser, and it is an end-to-end email encryption protocol that allows you to send an email to someone else. If that person has the same extension installed in their browser, the only two people who will be able to see the unencrypted version of that email are you and your recipient. Doesn't matter what kind of snooping they do in the in-between. There's no way for anyone in between. It doesn't matter how powerful a computer they have to crack the encryption. So far as anyone in the cryptology industry is concerned, this is uncrackable. And of course, I know I'm inviting all kinds of bad luck when I say it's uncrackable, sort of like saying the Titanic was unsinkable. But currently, this is the best way to send an email to someone without any fear that anyone in between you and your recipient has the ability to read it, including Google themselves. Even though it's a Gmail plugin on a Google browser, the fact is that as soon as you've typed it into this field on your browser, and it's encrypted in the back end, and as you send it through the ether, it's encrypted all the way until the person on the other end is reading it on their screen. So
that's interesting. I wonder if that's something they're doing so they can. I guess if there's legalities or something where they demand that they turn over like certain emails from certain accounts, that they can say we don't even have the key, so we can't actually give you that information. Right. So I wonder if it's somewhere that they're doing it to cover themselves.
Yep. Interestingly, as much as we get, like, we give Facebook and Google and any of these other big social media and data mining conglomerates, we give them a really hard time in terms of, the amount of publicity flack they end up getting every time they try to do something related to our data to try to make money off of the fact that they know something about us. But that's how they operate as a company. Surprisingly, even as much flack as we're giving them, as much press as they're getting, they're actually, in the grand scheme of things, Google and Facebook are actually some of the biggest advocates for individual privacy that exist in the internet, for individual privacy and also for net neutrality. The fact that Google is advocating end-to-end encryption is not at all surprising to me, because of the fact that Google and Facebook have been pushing back against government surveillance stuff, trying to get into their programs a lot. I mean, there's record of them having basically filed petitions and not petitions exactly, but filed for stays against these court orders. They're basically fighting it tooth and nail because they realize that privacy is a concern to their users. And so the fact that Google is making this technology says to me that they're not confident in their ability to beat the government in the court systems, but they are confident in their ability to make a technology that the government is unable to
force them into that.
Yeah, right. So, and I think that we may begin to see Facebook and other data mining conglomerates get to a point where they're saying, you know what? We've invested a lot of money into mining this data. We're not going to give it away to the CIA or the FBI or the NSA for free. We're not even going to sell it to them because they shouldn't have it in the first place, and our users don't want them to have it. So we're going to find ways to make it so that they can't get it. And the end-to-end encryption is helping a lot with that. There's also the fact that a lot of websites are now making SSL, which is the secure sockets layer, or whenever you see HTTPS at the beginning of your URL, that means that the communication between your web browser and that website is encrypted, and that the only people who are able to read the contents of that transaction are people who have the certificate, the security certificate, the one that's issued to that website for a given period of time. So obviously there are backdoors to some of that kind of stuff. If the right person were bribed with the right amount of money, some of those security certificates might be leaked. But on the whole, the idea is that these systems are designed with the intent of making it so that the information passes from one end to the other without any. It doesn't matter who looks at it in the in between. It looks like gibberish to anyone who isn't the originator or the intended recipient. So anyway, I wanted to bring that into the discussion there, because I think that we're going to see more and more of that over the next few years here. And it's a good idea for anybody who's interested in individual privacy and electronic security to begin looking at things like Google End-to-End and other communication encryption programs, whether they're third party or whether they're homebrew or other things like that, in order to basically make it as difficult as possible for anyone who's trying to steal your information to do so. If you make their job really, 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 really difficult, they're going to either find somebody else to spy on, or they're going to end up running out of funds trying to develop a solution to get through the security measures that you put in place.
All right.
And if enough people do it, it will be impossible for them to get through. If everyone were to implement this stuff right now, the NSA's spying programs would basically be kaput. They wouldn't have the ability. They don't have the computing power right now to crack individual communications, much less if everyone were to be doing it. So
I'm agree, and I mean, this is such a huge topic that it almost deserves its own episode. But
we'll get into it. We'll get into it another time, I'm sure.
Yeah, because we are just about an hour and a half here, so I guess we'll call it a close here.
There was I guess. Yeah, there were a few more things we were going to discuss according to, those are the things we love. We didn't get a chance to talk about the things that we don't love. I think we could make another episode out of, I looked, the two of us had relatively the same thing that we wanted to talk about on our do not like list. So we'll end up making another episode segment about that. Also, I want everyone to see this.
I didn't wear. I'll wear my cool shirt next time. I got nothing, but we'll try to figure out something for next time. So I guess we'll end it here. And for you guys tuning in, we really appreciate it. This is really, it's not a selfish self-promotion project. It's more promotion of understanding, because we both honestly think like the first step to fixing anything is actually being able to talk about it and to inspire ways to alternate ways to think about it. So hopefully you enjoyed. You'll tune in with us next time, and hopefully we can make something that's both informative and enjoyable for everybody here involved.
I agree. One more thing to point out. This is our first episode, but we intend on doing this on a consistent basis. We haven't yet settled on whether we're going to be doing this on a weekly basis or maybe every other week. But at the very least, once a month, we want to be getting these calls together, depending on our schedules and how all that works out. But we want to begin bringing in guest hosts to help us even further broaden the perspective from which we're able to observe and discuss these topics. But for right now, the best thing to do would be to follow us on Facebook and on YouTube. We are Deuce X Musica, which is DEUCEEXMUSICA. It's a play on words from a phrase which is Deus ex machina, which means God from a machine. We are Deuce X Musica, meaning two from music, and I think that really kind of is a great way of at least in an abbreviated fashion, describing what we are and what we're doing here. We're two people who come from the musical background, and we met through our musical ties, but through the years that relationship has turned into so much more than just the music now, and we're trying to bring that additional component to other people. So on Facebook, Deuce X Musica, on YouTube, /user/Deuce X Musica. We're also on Google Plus under the same name. I'm sure at some point we'll be getting Twitter and other stuff like that. But for right now, the best thing to do would be to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Facebook.
All right, Jimmy. We'll have more words once we get off this thing, but we'll figure it out for the next episode. And
all right.
From all of us here in the Middle East, we'll see you guys next episode.
All right. And from Fort Collins, Colorado, signing off.
Peace.